Are we living in a mafia state?
One simple word, Dagestanization. I'm in a possession of interesting knowledge.
Aren't you afraid that you also might end up in prison?
Something has radically changed in an astounding manner.
Can you call him a friend, Ivanishvili?
I was under the big strain. That was a big responsibility.
Ivanishvili's interests and Russian interests are overlapping now? Or Ivanishvili is just a puppet, and
Yes.
Russia is kind of driving its agenda through Georgian dream?
That marriage of convenience between Russia and Georgia's authorities, it's not about speaking about the protest movement, but it's about the national liberation movement. No one have seen a smoking gun as yet.
Hello and welcome to Talk Georgia, my English podcast on Georgian and regional politics. Talk Georgia is brought to you by Droeba Media Group, a trusted source of a very high quality news and analytical media content, and GSAC, a think tank providing comprehensive political analysis of Georgia and wider Black Sea region, also academic and practical training for postgraduate students and mid-career professionals. By the way, if you'd like to become a sponsor for Talk Georgia and your name and logo appear on the screen, do not hesitate to contact us. To dive into the developments that shape politics in and around this country, today we are joined by Mr. Victor Kipiani, the chair of Geocase, a think tank in Georgia, one of the leading think tanks, I would say. His interests include international relations, security, governance, geopolitics, and macroeconomy. Now, besides analytical work, Mr. Kipiani practices law. He's a senior partner and a co-founder of MKD law firm in Tbilisi. By the way, it's one of the oldest law firms in Georgia, founded in 1995 or 1996, if I'm not mistaken.
We've been shaping the history of Georgia. Besides, we're shaping our own legal practice. Yeah.
His legal practice is concentrated on business and contract law, project finance, capital markets, banking, energy, telecommunications, and corporate law. Victor Kipiani is author of various articles and surveys on the Georgian legal system. He's a member of Georgian Bar Association, a founder and a board member of a number of reputable organizations. There's a long list and I wouldn't really go on. Here, he's got awarded the Ivana Ivanishvili medal by Tbilisi State University for his fruitful cooperation with the university and for his outstanding contribution to the development of the legal profession. So he read law at Tbilisi State University, Exeter University in the United Kingdom, and Washington International University. Mr. Kipiani, welcome to my show. Please feel free to add anything to your biography I might have missed and you think that it's important for the audience to know. After that, I'll get down to business and move to the questions.
I'm very much flattered, by what you just read. And Mr. Rukhadze, thank you so much indeed for inviting me. Pleasure to be with you and really to be delighted on this podcast and look forward to very exciting and frank and open-minded conversation.
Great. Let's get started with, by the way, not a lot of people know that Mr. Kipiani is one of the very few people who worked for or with Mr. Ivanishvili as a lawyer in and assisting him in his cases against Swiss bank. And also what I would say that these cases in I think Singapore court, I think it was in Bermuda court, and the total amount was roughly 1.5 billion US dollars, led to those well-known conspiracy theories about Mr. Ivanishvili's money being held by the United States or Global War Party, and that's why apparently he was blackmailed, and so he was asked to drag Georgia into the war against Russia and these whole stories. It would be very interesting to shed light who really holds his money? And do you believe that these conspiracy theories about the Global War Party holding Mr. Ivanishvili's money?
Once one famous politician, a very nice personality, said that there was no former KGB man. So it just reminded me that when we speak about cancelling Mr. Ivanishvili, there was no former counsel for Ivanishvili. And of course, certain limitations do remain in place, as you rightly pointed out. But I also acknowledge, I recognize that those 5 years which we as a team been working for Mr. Ivanishvili have provided to us with an added value for status as some media shows or media outlets. That case was strictly and rigidly was the commercial case. That's something which we've been always been arguing with different cells of our society. At some point, it has gone beyond the reasonable control when, for some reasons, for some odd reasons, I have to say, it got the propaganda, which you've just mentioned. I said a few times on different public, in the course of different public conversations, that each time we've been preparing a public comment or a press release on the case, on the developments around the case, you mentioned Singapore, you mentioned Bermuda. There were different other ramifications. Just in a few words, there were one appeal of the case which was related to the court cases, and there was another which was about getting an access to the trustees' accounts. And that was not less important. That's where from this connotation of the de facto factual sanctions came out. On every single case, when we've been preparing press release, there was a struggle over a single word. Not to go beyond the legalese, keep within the framework of legalese, and not to inflate any assessments or remarks and providing them with some political flavor. That was a hard job. That was a very hard job. That was always a challenge. And sometimes we were successful to keep within the framework, and sometimes we were not, because when you work under the instructions of a client, especially such an important client, you have to hear, you have to listen to him. But at some point, I agree that different political camps and political circles started using that case for some, let's put it, very awkward objectives. And that's where the references to global war party. There was no deep state at that stage, on that stage yet. The concept of the deep state came out a little bit later. But the global war party showed up or popped up when we've been working for Mr. Ivanishvili. Of course, our advice has always been to keep the script of the case, that the case had to be decided in the courtrooms, but not on the political field. But different spokespeople for Georgian Dream, then later on the party called the People's Force. They've started using the case for domestic purposes and for non-domestic purposes. So to cut the story short, yes, that was the case with different implications, legal, geopolitical, politically, domestically, with security implications. All in all, we always been aware that we've not been working for an ordinary client, but someone whose role and presence and posture for Georgian, in the context of Georgian domestic politics and international politics, has been very important. That being said, of course, that case provided our team and me personally with a good feedback, with a good insight on different topics in the field of law and beyond the field of law. So, of course, those memories are still vivid. fresh on my mind. And sometimes, when I hold a glass of whiskey at the end of hard day, I'm sort of, enjoying, or sometimes try to enjoy myself with those memories.
First thing is that I think it was Ivanishvili himself who moved this case from legal into the political field. Because this is what he was really doing, in fact, he said that, okay, you owe me money. I have Georgia as a captive, or as my hostage, and unless you give me my money, I can do to this captive whatever I want. This is what his policies have been until now, sadly.
Again,
okay.
since we've left the ship, since we've left the board, there were some follow-up statements by Mr. Ivanishvili. Those statements went even deeper into that conspiracy theories or political reasoning or rationale or geopolitical rationale behind the keys. We also came across very bizarre open letters by some well-known, philosophers or statesmen, etc.,
But these people are mouthpiece for Ivanishvili.
Yes,
I don't think that was their own idea, just to come up with these ideas.
All in all, the keys through their mouthpieces have been shut off of those legal implications and became an object, not the subject, but an object of political manipulation of the hybrid warfare inside of the country and some sort of, disinformation campaign outside of the country. And that's the reality which we face today. We also have to remind to ourselves and remind to the audience that on different state visits by U.S. key public figures to Georgia, that case has again been brought to the surface as an excuse for meeting or for non-meeting or not listening or listening, etc., etc. So all in all, I think, to some extent, the dispute with Credit Suisse has been now diminished because a few other concepts being brought into the place, but nevertheless, it's still there, and it could be reactivated in one way or another on a need basis.
Okay, I think how did it go, the work with him? Because what kind of man is he? Let's say, okay, you finished contract and that's it.
He finished.
Was he happy that everybody was finished well, or was he not happy and this is why it finished? That's one kind of question. Another thing is that when I'm thinking to people who aided Ivanishvili in his cases, and the prime example is, for example, Bachiashvili, he ended up in prison, and some of the other business people who had ties with him, they also ended up in prison. So aren't you afraid that you also might end up in prison? And one more thing. So I think, for example, I give you my own example. I worked for a few important people in this country and outside of this country. And in some cases, it was strictly business. In some cases, we became friends, for example, and even though when the contract was over, we retained contacts and, we went for a drink or whatever. So how did it work with, in your case? So can you call him a friend, Ivanishvili? Or it was strictly business?
To start with, Bachiashvili's story is completely different, of course, and our mandate is completely different story.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
There could be no comparison, not because I'm sort of, shy or scared or afraid, but that completely different tracks, as I've said. On Bachiashvili, by the way, I'm personally extremely sorry for what's happening with Giorgi, because I've been working him on a regular basis, on a daily basis, on a 24/7 basis, and I could say, and I have to say, this is up to my personal dignity, if you want, that he was extremely loyal to the case. And if not his help, if not his contribution, if not his input in different ways, in terms of logistics, in terms of his finance expertise, in terms of him being a key witness, on that case, both in Bermuda and in Singapore. Of course, I would not be saying that the results would be radically different, but he has contributed a lot. So I could highly praise his professional skills and his personal loyalty. Personally for me, since I was dealing with him on a regular and daily basis, those relations were not just about Credit Suisse, but about different issues. About different issues in politics or geopolitics, or etc., etc. So of course, I'm in a possession of interesting knowledge. Let's put it this way, and of course, sometimes I'm tempted, so to provide with some more feedback or comments. But of course, the red lines are red lines, and I think those red lines are to the benefit of our prestige and professional reputation. So that's one point. So the relations were challenging. As for my relations, my personal relations, for the whole period of 5 years, there were not relations of typical relations of the clients and the counsel. Those were relations based on reciprocity, positive attitudes from his side towards me. Once I said that quite often prior to making a call, he was writing a message asking, Victor, do you have a time to pick up my call, or after completing the call, if you have time, to take care of what I asked, and my response was always, that Mr. Ivanishvili, you're the key client for us. Of course, please feel free, and that I know certain, prescriptions on your asking us or some limitations. Of course, you always feel free. It's our duty, etc., etc. And that has continued on an uninterrupted basis for a whole 5 years' time. If not for those 3 days, when something has radically changed in an astounding manner. And
it's getting very interesting here.
Yes, and then the first phone conversation which I had with him, when he said that we have to stop, and then he continued on his semi-reasons, let's put it this way. The first word which I pronounced and then keep saying over and over, unbelievable, and that was really unbelievable, because our work has always been very highly praised.
Why do you think that happened?
Then he put that upside down. I mean, just with sort of, clicking his fingers. I'm not aware, listen, I have my own understanding, what happened.
Well, that would be very interesting to hear.
I have my understanding. I won't be. I can't expand on that understanding, but all I could say that obviously, an environment where I happened to be became, let's speak very diplomatically, became very competitive. Okay, very competitive. And I think, those regular communications with him, and people were familiar around him that we've not been communicating just on the Credit Suisse, but on different other topics, and those relations became very intimate. And of course, you said, whether he became a friend of mine. Of course, he did not. But I always had a feeling that I had a client with whom I could always speak openly. And not just about Credit Suisse, but about different other issues. And by the way, when these days some people are saying that as if I betrayed him, etc., etc., I'm asking, whom did I betray? And on what grounds? Because he always knew that I was not a voter for Georgian dream. I've been criticizing Georgian dream, I've been saying some other things, which I won't be disclosing even in the course of this podcast, but
Sure.
I've always been open in my statements, and he always knew that conceptually I've been belonging to a different camp.
Okay.
And we've been arguing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we've been arguing very hotly. But I thought that arguing hotly and debating, that was the essence of open relations, open, honest relations. And my recollections are very complex. And that complexity runs across being grateful and thankful. And then suddenly came across such sort of, non-understandable. I was about to say ingratitude, but let's skip over that word. The turning the ship, in different directions, and hearing what I've had. Of course, I still, to be honest, I still keep, some negative feelings as a result, because we've been investing very heavily, not just time-wise, but psychology-wise and health. That case been consummating much of my efforts and physical efforts, not just intellectual efforts. And again, I would restrain myself to touching on some personal details, but that
What do you mean by physical efforts?
I was under the big strain. That was a big responsibility. And that was extremely big responsibility on my shoulders. First of all, the case itself, was a big architecture. And there were different teams across different jurisdictions, so you have to be in touch with all of them, addressing inquiries, then communicating the client, then communicating from the client to them, and being a legal counselor, being a manager, being on the logistical side, being a psycho counselor, if you wish. That was the myriad of our function, and that was not easy. And then, Giorgi, as you said, when those inappropriate connotations have popped up, of course, the case became even more challenging. And then the war in Ukraine has started. It has brought, its own strata of complications. So it was not a typical role of a typical counsel, trust me. And that being said, witnessing that end, which we have witnessed, everything ends, at some point. But ending that in the context of, as it happened, of course, I have my own personal reservations and my own personal emotions and feelings.
Okay, let's move to the current affairs. What is happening around us? For example, a few days ago, we heard that the husband of one of the biggest opposition parties was kidnapped and was forced to record a video apologizing for something he did 8 years ago, and he did already apologize for that. As we already mentioned here, Bachishvili, he was kidnapped from, Mr. Bachishvili was kidnapped from the other country, not Georgia, and was brought here. Almost on a daily basis, we see this or that political leader going to jail. And the list is there, and I think it's upcoming. Some of the other opposition leaders can end up behind the bars. The Georgian government, that it calls itself a government, but democratic world basically doesn't recognize Ivanishvili's regime as a legitimate governor of this country. I can continue forever. For example, let's say Mr. Kobakhidze, GD Prime Minister, he praises China as a model country, and at the same time he wants to settle relations with the US and start from a clean slate. I can continue endlessly about the terrible things that that are happening in this country, and at the same time conflicting things that the Georgian Dream regime is doing. I believe that we are in unprecedented crisis. Maybe in the 90s we had the worst situation, but since then I don't recall any situation in Georgia when we were in this kind of trouble. Are we living in a mafia state already? Are we living in an autocratic state, fully autocratic? Are we under dictatorship of Ivanishvili? Mm-hmm. And what is the way out of the situation? I don't know, that's a lot of questions altogether, but we've got plenty of time, just to go through that. You may comment on the current affairs as you wish, and then we'll go to analysis.
Of course, again, thank you for that question, and which is very painful and very sensitive and very delicate as well. Again, when I speak about delicacy, of course, we have to keep as much responsibility in framing our response as much as we can, but at the same time not to go away from responding to that question directly. There's a saying in Georgia, and that saying goes in a way that based on that saying, there's a type of constitutional coup d'etat. And that constitutional coup d'etat could be splitted, or has to be splitted into stages. The first stage was about disabling the state institutions. Sometimes it goes under the name of capturing the state institutions. And the second stage is about capturing Georgia's geopolitical choice. So, and that saying says that once this second stage is completed, the whole process of constitutional coup d'etat would be dealt with successfully. Hopefully we'll not get there, but still, that the construction. That about the saying, but and I've been as if I've been pointing out to that saying, but still, since I'm relying my response on that saying, I think that is not devoid of the rationale behind. My personal explanation, however, would be that you mentioned mafia state, okay? Now, without exaggerating, although day before yesterday, when we've had about that story of Bokuchava's husband, etc., I put one simple word in my story: Dagestanization.
Or the Chechnya.
Anyway, conceptually, it speaks about the same. So, again, if we run an analogy with that saying I just mentioned, I also would split my response into two stages. The first stage that we lost a normalcy when we speak about the state of Georgia, and often enough, frequently now, when I'm asking, what we have to be done, of course, we speak a lot about Article number 78, etc., but I'm always saying that the prime objective is get back to the normalcy. Of course, foreign objectives, etc., Euro integration or NATO, those are still on the agenda, hopefully and thankfully, but we have to regain the normalcy. But that being the first response, the first leg of my response. Now the second leg of response, due to the developments which we witnessed within the very short span of time, 5, 6, or 7 months. And it's not just about times being flying, but developments are changing negatively so quickly. Just by in a fracture of a glimpse. So it's now about not about normalcy of the state, but regaining the state.
Absolutely.
So we've got even to the west point, to the west, to the lowest point. So again, when we were debating about being normal or abnormal, still it's about more or less, certain framework of a book of the statesmanship. But these days it's not about this statesmanship at all. it's not about the state as the definition goes. So based on that, Giorgi, I even suggested that it's not about speaking about the protest movement, but it's about the national liberation movement. And again, without exaggerating or without dramatizing, but my feeling, and I suspect I'm not in the minority, the feelings of many of us, that it's about regaining the statehood. The statehood which, as we see in the constant process of being obliterated. And also another type of response that the way of running this as if the state became very thuggish, very syndicated. It's a sort of confluence of semi or quasi-state institutions with some other influences or some other impacts from business, from informal groups, from criminals. So it's a very dire situation at this point. As I've said, it's not about broad agenda in as much as about the basics. And oddly enough, the rhetorics which we hear about the sovereignty, identity, it's really sort of manipulating with those words, because by saying or by making an emphasis through the words and through the messages, in practice they're doing the opposite. So I think that their appeal is more about us regaining that very same sovereignty and the statehood than about them protecting them in words, but dismantling on a regular basis through very concrete and practicable deeds and actions.
And the million-dollar question is that you are talking about regaining statehood and liberation or liberty. Yeah. The question is how? Okay, what you described is what we see almost on a daily basis.
By the way, Giorgi, one intervention. When I say the regaining the state, again, it's not about the domestic developments. It's also about non-domestic developments.
Okay, we'll move to that later.
No one's have seen a smoking gun as yet, but we could have our assumptions. And those assumptions, or presumptions, or assumptions, dictate us to say, dictate us to question, at least, how big, or how dramatic, how deep is infiltration by non-Georgian forces. And that actually, if it's about capturing the state, my fear that it's not being captured from inside these days as being captured from outside. So again, I've not seen any case file, but again, when we make an analogy, it's not necessarily about copy pasting, but some basic indicators. Some basic indicators dictate us that the capturing, that very same capturing of the state, which we have to regain. Goes not just goes not from inside, but from outside. I mean, it goes from inside, but it goes from outside. So that said, the challenge which we're facing even bigger, even harder, and even tougher. And therefore, and I would conclude on that, when we speak about foreign diplomats or foreign community, etc., when I speak with them, I'm saying that Georgia case is not about Georgia only. It's much bigger. The stakes is much higher. And therefore, probably your question would be on that side as well of our conversation, that once we speak about the liberation on the national liberation movement, it's not about the Georgians, it's about the stake of the Western democracy. If that word, I recognize that the Western democracy provokes, some irritations or some disappointment. But again, I myself, I always been positioning myself as a real politic man. But over the last period of time, I also recognize the politics, which are completely devoid of the values, are not sustainable. And if we speak about the values, of course, democracy, of course, rule of law, transparency, accountability, those matter. And especially those matter for us, because not having any other resources, military or economic, we have to be proud by the quality of the political life, of the quality of the societal life. And that quality, when we speak about that quality, a sole business card, a sole viable business card, which we could produce, is being either democracy or being non-democracy. We can't be semi-democracy.
That's very interesting.
We can't. We have a choiceless choice. We have to be either on one side of the story or on another side of the story. We can't be stuck somewhere in between.
Well, I think that that being said, I mean, my next question is going to be about geopolitics, basically. But before that, what you just said, and I'm a very direct man, and I want to kind of clarify what you said. Well, at least what you meant was that, okay, you said that Russia captured Georgian state. Okay, foreign players, well, I don't think that it was the Washington or the Brussels or even Beijing that did it. So the Georgian state was captured from the outside forces. As I understood, that was, I think, the Russian special operation. But what is the role of the local players? I think that everybody understands that the local player here is Ivanishvili and nobody else. And is he a proxy then? I think,
capturing.
Or, I mean, my question is this, okay? Is this happening because Ivanishvili's interests and Russian interests are overlapping now? Mm-hmm. Or Ivanishvili is just a puppet? And Russia is kind of driving its agenda through Georgian dream.
It's a very conceptual question, and but I'll try to respond in a less conceptual way as much as I can. Capturing is not necessarily by rolling in tanks. Mm-hmm. Capturing is also by instilling your mindset.
Okay.
And I think that that what we're witnessing these days, having exactly that mindset of the Homo Sovieticus, which has not gone away, regretfully for us. We thought that we passed the non-return point, and it looks like that we did not. And that Homo Sovieticus has been revived and got back. So I think that when we speak about the syndicated way of running Georgia at this point, it's about sort of, the reactivating that legacy of Georgia's Soviet Socialist Republic and putting them into the full action. Now, a few other points. When I said that I've not seen a smoking gun, but there is also another the widely contested concept about marriage of convenience. Mm-hmm. And I think that what we see these days, it's about marriage of convenience. That marriage of convenience between Russia and Georgia's authorities, or de facto authorities, go along the following lines. Russia always very suspicious about its buffer states, and the concept of strategic depths has always been the concept being obsessed by any type of Russia, whether it was Russian Empire or Soviet Union or this type of Russian Federation. So on another side, and on another side, it's about the Georgian dream squeezing out the Western matrica from Georgia, and squeezing out the Western matrica is about saying no to accountancy, transparency, proper election, etc., etc. So I think those two interests, in the context of the marriage of convenience, they very much neatly coincide with each other. Again, to repeat, I'm not sure that someone is calling, from Moscow, from Kremlin, someone in Tbilisi, giving direct instructions, etc., etc. I've not witnessed, those calls. I've not witnessed, any Fazbaz man sitting, at the module or anywhere else and giving instructions. But that marriage of convenience these days is very much on the surface. And I think, it is not contested that that alignment of interests by Georgian dream and by the core theme of the Georgian dream, or semi-Georgian dream, or semi-syndicate, and the Kremlin, they very much in alignment with each other. So I think that is very obvious, and also as you said, someone's being a proxy for Kremlin or anyone else. Again, I was a proviso, and there was a caveat that at this point, as we speak, we don't have anything tangible in our hands, although I also keep saying that let us be prepared that the history will present us with some unpleasant pages of the histories nowadays, but that marriage of convenience works very, 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 very smoothly, very neatly. It's not a big relief for us. It's not a big consolation whether the reality which we're facing is due to one consequence or another consequence, but again, that's where we are. So I think the stakes these days, when I said that the Georgia stories is bigger than the Georgia is, it's about not just about the politics inside of Georgia, but it's about new balance of powers in the region. It's about new geopolitical landscape. It's about the values on the Western side, because the West has always been proud of its values, alongside with its economic might or military might, etc., etc. It's also another challenging point how much the West is struggling these days with the values-driven policy. But I think our key points of appeal when we're speaking to the Western partners should be very much based on the alignment of interests, but also alignment of values. And being successful in Georgia would have a ripple effect beyond Georgia. Being non-successful in Georgia and having a failure in Georgia would equally have a ripple effect. So I think we should be very, very more articulated in terms of presenting all the stakes of either being successful or being unsuccessful.
Let's zoom out a little bit now, and exactly what you're saying, I agree with you that the values and inclination to become a democracy was Georgia's biggest selling point over the years towards our Western partners, and Georgia's will to be part of a democratic camp. Because again, when you look at that, since early 2000s, when Shevardnadze declared that Georgia wants to become part of NATO, etc., and then we had Rose Revolution, and so the very pro-Western, reform-minded, the government. I think since then it was clear, not only to me but to a lot of people, that Georgia's direction was clearly Euro-Atlantic, pro-Western, and even though it has never been a proper democracy, Georgia was making progress on that path. And I've dedicated all my professional life to this idea that the one day Georgia will become a full democracy, the proper part of the Euro-Atlantic world, and then that I would call a mission. And when that has been completed, I would say that, well, that's time to retire now, because we are now on the safe side, truly. But, and I believe even though Georgia had other advantages compared to some of the other countries, we can say that we are an energy corridor, that is very important indeed. We are a trade route, which also can be very important, but none of them on their own were that important to attract particular attention from the West. So, my question to you is this. If Ivanishvili's regime succeeds in establishing dictatorship in this country, and I think that this is what they are trying to do, I'm not naive enough to believe that, at some point they will turn around and say that, okay, guys, we are going to take away all these repressive laws and we are going to hold free and fair elections and we want to go back to the NATO and EU aspirations, etc. I don't think it will ever happen because they back themselves in the corner in a way that there is no way back. But let's assume that they succeed in their endeavor and Georgia becomes an autocracy, which is possible. I mean, Azerbaijan is an autocracy, Belarus is an autocracy. Of course, there are differences, but I'm not talking about this now. If this happens, how do you see Georgia's geopolitical role in the region, or will it have a role? And again, as you are saying that, well, what we see now, politics is becoming more black and white than it was before. And you have the democratic camp, you have autocratic camp, and the gray zone in between is becoming thinner. Do you think that the Georgia will be part of this gray zone, however thin it can become, or it is going to be part of autocratic world and tell the others that, okay, if you have interests here in Georgia, whether it be trade or energy corridor or whatever, deal with an autocracy as you deal with Azerbaijan or some of the other autocracies. Of course, Georgia's importance will be less than Azerbaijan or or Saudi Arabia, for example, but, what is left there? Is there any space?
Yes,
for Georgia's importance?
Yes, while listening to you, I spotted the myriad of issues which have to be addressed in a more extensive way. But I'll try to address at least some of them. I could be forgetting about some nuances or some previous or caveats which still I was about to make. First of all, you mentioned the gray zone, and again, to acknowledge the very tough environment around Georgia, which is about a different type of gray zone, Georgi. It's about convergence of that black and white and converging into gray type of governance. And that's something which we see not just on the side of the revisionist world, but on the side of the so-called democratic world, the processes, developments which are taking place in the United States. If you ask me, I'm not a public official, so I can say that some of them, they do not stand the reasonable test of critics.
Absolutely.
And that, that very non-convenient convergence for us, and very much convenient convergence for that type of governance which we already described here as thuggish, syndicated, etc., etc. That this is one point to mention. The second important point, you mentioned the role, and you mentioned Shevardnadze, so I have to stick to that reference. But we've spoke about the values-driven policy, but again, in this world, when there is so much convergence and the transactionality, etc., etc., it's also about the function, the role of us being useful. And at some point, I even introduced the term of Shevardnadze's doctrine. First of all, I very much like for us to speak about doctrines in Georgian geopolitical thinking, political thinking, because it brings up our self-esteem. And then and also about the practicality of the doctrine, because these days especially, the international relations are like a stock exchange. It's not about you being the consumer, but you have to be the contributor. And I think that is the challenge for any state, and especially it is a challenge for a small state or for compact states, and specifically in such volatile regions as the Black Sea or the South Caucasus is. You have to have your own role.
Absolutely.
You have to have your own function, and you have to punch above your weight.
You have always been struggling, for maintaining that place. And although we mentioned on few occasions democracy, etc., but in my last writings, I'm using the word democracy less, but more frequently competitiveness and mobility. And again, if we look at the world in the perspectives of 10 years or 15 years from now, and if these developments which we're facing these days, would be developing even further, of course, we will face a world where just being liked or disliked because you're nice, etc., would not suffice anymore. So about having the function, about having the role, about being of use, I'm not saying to the global politics, but at least, to something which is more than just your national agenda is. And that's why when I mentioned Shevardnadze and different pipes, etc., that was about putting Georgia on the map, on the regional map, and implanting Georgia's role into the broader picture. So, alongside with different other downs, which we see these days in Georgia with the current authorities, I'm also saying that my critical and my most principal point of dissatisfaction about them introducing mediocrity. And I think, that is even more critical, because for us, we have to be ambitious. It's not about doing something unreasonable, etc. Thinking about some unreasonable, but we have to be ambitious. We don't have a pleasure, we don't have a luxury.
How can you be ambitious when one man captured the state?
We don't have a comfort zone to placate ourselves with the thinking that something would eventually turn right into our favor. No. And I think, the mediocrity and sort of, making the Georgian politics as a type of commodity and merchandise for just two purposes: access to power and access to resources. And at the expense of those two objectives, turning your backs to the mobility of thinking, to competitiveness, to strategic vision, to always propagating that nothing about Georgia without Georgia, and we're ambitious, we're ready to contribute, etc. I think, that one of the worst consequences which Georgia Dream would eventually leave to us as its own legacy, and something which has to be addressed, has to be recovered. So I think, that is very, very, very unpleasant consequence, to put it mildly, which we're facing, and that downgrades the level of thinking, that downgrades, the political philosophy, that downgrades, the demand for grand visionarist politicians. And look, the stories which we were hearing these days, it's not about our ambitions, it's not about our geopolitical contribution or geoeconomical contribution, it's about the power. Either keeping the power, or grabbing the power, or having an access to the wealth, etc. So we became very much mercantilistic. In that respect. And once the state becomes such a Georgia becomes mercantilistic, it's one big step toward immobilizing your statehood, toward losing that competitiveness, and it's about the future of your own identity as well.
Thank you very much. It was incredibly interesting. And just going back where
hopefully it was not very much sophisticated, but I just tried to speak myself out, as I thought it would be.
And coming back where we started, you said the phrase that there was one moment when something turned in Bidzina's head, and that radically changed everything. Was it Kobakhidze's voice, you think?
Well, I said that in relation to our mandate and our contracts, and I also said that I feel or to acknowledge that I've been acting in a competitive environment. Now you reminded me what I was about. My hunch tells me that he was very heavily helped by some well wishers and counselors. Although regardless how much he was helped by them, of course, eventually he was the sole man to make a final judgment. But I never said that, and let me put this in this way. Even if it was because of them and due to them, I'm very much grateful to their contribution.
Okay.
To their contribution, to their input of prompting that decision, which came out so unpleasantly for me at that point.
But when you're looking back,
but the decision, I'm very much happy with. These days.
Once again, thank you very much, Mr. Kipiani. Thanks for watching us, listening to us. Please like us, subscribe to us, and I'll see you next week.